Okay, we'll start with this. Per an article published in Denmark, it appears that the WBO's bantamweight champion, Dina Thorslund, is going to be getting back out there in November against the Ring Magazine's #1 bantamweight, Mexico's own Zulina Muñoz.
What language is this?
Looks Spanish.
I'm more partial to a good croissant myself. We here at Ring IQ Industries worked round the clock to decipher this message and translate it. The article reads, on Saturday, November 13th, Dina Thorslund, 16-0, puts her newly won WBO title in the bantamweight division at stake for the first time. It will take place in Kolding, where Thorslund meets a very difficult opponent on paper. 34-year-old Zulina Muñoz is ranked #1 in the world bantamweight rankings at Ring, where Thorslund tempts a life as #5. On BoxRec's computer rankings, the Mexican is #4 in the world, while Thorslund is #1. Muñoz was, from 2012 to 2016, WBC world champion at junior bantamweight, a title she defended 10 times before losing it to her compatriot Guadalupe Guzman. Since then, she has moved up in weight to bantamweight.
This is definitely a step up from Joseph Noriega,
who Dina Thorslund took on a little over 2 months ago in June when she descended to the bantamweight division from super bantamweight to compete for the newly vacated WBO title,
thereby becoming a 2-division champion.
Zulina Muñoz of Mexico debuted as a professional way back when in 2005, and she has since fought 58 times, sporting a professional record of 53 wins, 3 losses, 2 draws, 30 knockouts.
She's only ever been stopped once in 58 contests.
Wasn't even that long ago. That was in April of 2019 against her countrywoman, Mayeli Flores, the unbeaten Mayeli Flores. Zulina Muñoz has seen action since then. She's fought 4 times since being knocked out in the 5th round of her fight with Mayeli Flores. She's fought 4 times since then. She's won 4 fights since then.
She's rebounded off that loss.
And as stated, Zulina Muñoz, comparatively, as an opponent for the reigning champion Dina Thorslund, is a step up from a Joseph Noriega. Zulina Muñoz, she has been in there with some live bodies. She's been in there with some live animals. She actually sports a victory over Tenkai Tsunami, who we very recently saw in action against Anicia Estrada. She fought Maribel Ramirez 2 times. The first time, Zulina won a decision. The second time, she knocked Maribel out. Maribel, who's the current reigning WBA champion in the women's super flyweight division. She drew many years ago with Mayerlin Rivas, who currently reigns as the WBA's super bantamweight champion. Her and Zulina, they fought way back when in 2010, fight that was scored a draw. And there are familiar names scattered all throughout Zulina Muñoz's body of work. Alicia Graf, Candy Sandoval, you name it. Zulina Muñoz is a fighter that's been around the block more than once, and this is who Dina is going to be defending her newly obtained WBO title against in November. I think Dina is catching Zulina at the most opportune time. I do think it's the right time to take on
Zulina Muñoz.
You have to consider that not that long ago, Zulina Muñoz was stopped for the very first time in her career. And, she has since rebounded. She fought 4 times since then, but that was all against pedestrian-level competition. Girls with upside-down records. In her last fight, Zulina had a very close call
with Isis Vargas.
Zulina was very fortunate that the fight was ruled a split decision in her favor. I'm not trying to sell Zulina short. I'm just giving it to you straight. It's the only way I know how to give it to you. But yes, Zulina Muñoz is a step up from a Joseph Noriega.
And there are far worse people to fight than Zulina Muñoz.
She is a quality operator at a certain level, and I do believe you have to be at a certain level in order to beat her. I'm just saying that I think right now is a very opportune time.
I like Dina's chances.
Dina Thorslund, who's a part of that big bantamweight picture. She is one of 4 active reigning world champions at this weight. Mexico's own Yuli Hangaluna holding the WBC, Argentinia's own Ceci Roman holding the IBF, Shannon Courtenay of the UK holding the WBA.
4 titles split 4 ways between 4 fighters.
4 champions. And beyond this upcoming fight in November, I anticipate that Dina Thorslund might be a person of interest for Shannon Courtenay in the year of 2022 once Shannon gets past that Jamie Mitchell fight. If she gets past Jamie Mitchell, going into the next year, as it begins, they might look to Dina for a unification match.
We'll talk more about the fight as the fight date approaches.
In other news, I'm sure most of you have heard by now, in lieu of the news that Oscar Valdez is going to be allowed to fight in spite of his positive VADA findings, Caleb Plant, like many people, reacted to that news, and he reacted adversely. He said, "Nobody puts anything in my body without me getting it approved first by VADA, who's the strictest testing company. At this level, and with everything that's at risk, why would I let somebody else play with my name?" Shaking my damn head. So after everything a fighter works for and sacrifices, you're just going to let someone tell you to take something and you're just going to take it, and not even be concerned that they may be flushing all you've accomplished down the drain. Because at the end of the day, he has a name, and even being mentioned of who might have given him the herbal tea. Nope. The only name that's come out is the one who took it. So why let someone put you in that position? If you really start asking yourself these questions and really start unpacking all this, question by question, does it really add up? Does it really make sense? Fuck no. This sport has no place for cheaters.
Yeah, right.
Get the fuck out of here. People don't take this stuff out of confidence. They take it out of fear. They don't want to let their nuts hang, so they take shit that'll make them shrink. I said what I said, and I stand by it. So fuck whoever don't like it. The people in the sport know what's up, but the ones who don't speak up are the same ones who cheat just like them.
Yeah, speaking out don't make your Mother Teresa.
Ahead of his rematch with Bernard Hopkins, it was Jean Pascal that was advocating that Bernard Hopkins take an anti-doping test, only for that same Jean Pascal, years later, to test positive for not just
one performance-enhancing drug,
but four performance-enhancing drugs. So speaking out,
and that ain't nothing but a dog and pony show.
It's what it was when Jean Pascal spoke out. It's also what it was when Jarrell Miller tried to speak out, tried to cast an air of doubt over Anthony Joshua, only so that same Jarrell Miller could test positive for 3 performance-enhancing drugs ahead of the Joshua fight. It seems to me that a lot of these guys that are speaking out aren't actually speaking out. They're projecting. They're projecting their own inadequacies on their quarry. When Caleb tries to lay this guilt trip on all those who aren't quote-unquote speaking out, you'll excuse me for saying so, but I'm not buying it. He added, "You mean to tell me that you've made over $100 million and live in San Diego, but you ate some tacos or a steak at some random-ass taco stand in Mexico or some random-ass steakhouse, and just doing that once makes your levels that high?"
I mean, I've asked those same questions myself.
Anyone who's been following this channel long enough knows that those are the same questions I asked when that entire fiasco between Canelo Alvarez and Gennady Golovkin kicked off.
I don't recall Caleb raising this much of a stink about it.
Caleb, who added, "It almost seems frowned upon to even speak up on this stuff in boxing, but I don't give a fuck, because there's a whole other world out there when it comes to banned substances that people in the fight game don't want to speak up about, but I could care less. There's no room for it."
That's very altruistic of you.
But I'm going to be honest. Caleb Plant's selective outrage, and the selective outrage we've been seeing in the boxing community as of late in reference to Oscar Valdez and the Reynoso gym, the association with Canelo Alvarez, on the face of it, it might seem like moral outrage when all I see is moral turpitude.
Oh, what's turpitude?
Is that stuff you mix in paints, varnishes, and liniment?
No, that's turpentine.
So then what's turpitude?
Depravity. Turpitude is depravity. And what I'm seeing from Caleb Plant is moral depravity, moral turpitude. Because for all these speeches, this tirade that he wants to go on ahead of this Canelo Alvarez fight, for this high horse that he wants to sit on,
Bet you he won't call off this fight.
and that makes Caleb just as big an enabler of doping in the sport of boxing as the drug pushers themselves. If you're this suspicious of Canelo Alvarez and what goes on in the Reynoso gym, then why are you fighting him?
Why don't you just call the whole goddamn thing off?
I'll tell you why. It's because of the money. It's because of the money. It's because of the payday.
Go through with this. You already sold your soul, Caleb.
You and everybody else. You see, I take a very nuanced stance these days when it comes to doping and anti-doping in the sport of boxing. I'm of the opinion that the sport is actually dirtier than people realize. It's actually dirtier than people know, than those few guys that actually get caught and exposed. I'm of the opinion that
Everybody knows it's a dirty sport.
they quite selectively pick and choose when they want to let that dirty sport, and how dirty it is, they pick and choose when they want to let that bother them.
They're hypocrites.
And so is Caleb. So is Caleb Plant if he decides to go through with this fight in spite of his own suspicions. The quote-unquote stance that he's taking, which is no stand at all. If you really want to take a stand and you really want to send people a message, you'll pull out of this fight. You'll call the whole goddamn thing off because you're not going to walk in there with a ped cheat.
That's what you think Canelo is, right?
He's a cheater, and so is everybody at the Reynoso gym. If you're going to implicate that many people on a whim based on what's going on with Oscar, and this is your stance, this is how you feel, why are you enabling Canelo Alvarez by fighting him?
The cheater can't cheat if you don't fight him.
Is it that the money is simply too good and you can't pass that up? Because if it is, you are effectively selling your soul and your principles.
It's just can of theatrics.
What do you think you're doing? You think you're saying something that's never been said before? You think you're the first guy that goes on record, public record, speaking out against doping in the sport of boxing? Jean Pascal and Jarrell Miller did that, and those two guys ended up being guilty. Those two guys ended up testing positive for performance-enhancing drugs. So how do we know that something similar doesn't apply to you? You are a Snack Systems fighter, after all. Snack, which was founded by Victor Conti. Victor Conti was all wrapped up in Balco.
But you'll vouch for him, right?
The same way you're using something in Canelo Alvarez's past against Eddie Reynoso is the same way that someone can use Victor Conti's past against you. How do we know that guy's not helping you get around those VADA tests?
Oh, you think he turned over a new leaf?
So who says Canelo Alvarez didn't turn over a new one too? Don't misunderstand me. I don't believe Oscar Valdez's story about herbal tea the same way I don't believe Canelo Alvarez's story about tainted meat from a taco truck, the same way I didn't believe Tyson Fury's story about wild boar penises, and the same way I didn't believe Luis Ortiz's story about tainted horse meat. I don't believe any of these guys, including Caleb Plant.
Yeah, I don't believe any of these guys.
Not anymore, because while Caleb Plant is sitting there vouching for Victor Conti, his own stablemate casted an air of doubt, an air of suspicion over Victor Conti and what's going on over there at Snack. Jermall Charlo. Remember that Willie Monroe was supposed to fight Jermall Charlo, and Willie Monroe is a Snack Systems fighter. Willie Monroe ended up testing positive for a banned substance, and Matt Korobov ended up standing in his place. So if every Eddie Reynoso fighter is guilty by association, based on Canelo's past and Oscar's recent test, if they're all guilty by association, does the same then not apply to every Snack Systems fighter based on Willie?
Based on Willie's positive test and Victor Conti's sordid history.
It's Caleb Plant that's urging us all to start asking questions, after all. Start unpacking it. Well, let's unpack it. Doesn't that make you guilty by association? Should we be suspicious of you based on Willie and Victor?
There's no easy way to have this conversation.
There's no easy way to approach this subject. Caleb Plant himself, based on his own logic, he's in no position to talk. But if he really says what he means and means what he says, the one way that he can prove it is pulling out of this fight and dealing with the repercussions of that, whatever they are. If you really think Canelo Alvarez is that dirty, and all those Eddie Reynoso fighters, they're all dirty too, why don't you send him a message and leave the money on the table? Mr. High Horse, Mr. Moral Outrage. I'll tell you something. You go through with this fight in spite of everything you've already said. That makes you just as big an enabler as everyone else. The sport of boxing, as a sport, can't seem to make up its mind how it really feels about doping within the sport. Underneath it all, it can't make up its mind. Those in the business and those outside of it, the fans themselves. I remember when news broke that Canelo Alvarez tested positive for clenbuterol, and I remember that there were a lot of people that were very forgiving of this. You know, Canelo Alvarez's hardcore fans, and a separate group, another group, who didn't like Gennady Golovkin too much. They disliked that guy so much, they were willing to overlook Canelo Alvarez's clenbuterol scandal.
They didn't care.
And these guys didn't get swallowed up by the earth. They didn't disappear. They've just changed their stance because
Now he's fighting a PBC fighter.
and for whatever reason, they pledge fealty to the PBC. Now they want to call Canelo a dirty fighter. Now they want to shed all this light on the subject. The same guys that vouched for Luis Ortiz. The same Luis Ortiz who tested positive for a banned substance.
You don't see them bringing that up.
Whilst Ring Magazine still ranks Luis Ortiz as a top 10, I think a top 5 heavyweight for having beaten who? You don't see as much attention go into scrutinizing Luis Ortiz the way they like to all of a sudden scrutinize Canelo Alvarez.
The same Canelo they used to vouch for.
Back when it was about Canelo Alvarez versus Gennady Golovkin. Now that it's about Canelo Alvarez versus Caleb Plant, they've taken a different position. And we can play this whataboutism game with almost anybody and everybody in the sport. We can do this.
The sport is rife with peds.
It's rife with banned substances, and it's rife with hypocrites that don't really know how they feel about it. They change their stance whenever it's convenient on both sides of the business, inside and outside.
Hell, even I'm guilty of this to some degree.
I'll tell you that the stance I've had in the past has since changed. after taking a good long look at the entire situation on both sides of the business, my stance is a little bit more nuanced than someone else's.
I'm suspicious of everybody.
So much so that I'm suspicious of anybody whose haircut's too low. What's that guy trying to avoid? A follicle
I'm
test?
suspicious of everybody.
Because for all I know, and all I don't know, all these guys might be on something. And this entire dog and pony show isn't actually about justice and bringing guilty parties to light. No, the guilty
The
parties.
sport of boxing itself is the guilty part.
When it comes to anti-doping in the sport doesn't really want reform. Not bad enough anyways, not bad enough to make serious changes because somebody's gonna have to foot the bill, and nobody really wants to. It is very expensive.
For year-round, randomized drug testing.
On every fighter, at every level, in every country, who's gonna pay for all that?
Because somebody would have to.
Boxing doesn't want it bad enough. The sport is dirtier than people know, dirtier than people realize. And just because Caleb Plant wants to cry about this now, cry about it now that it's convenient for him to do so, just because he's doing this now, that doesn't make him any less of an enabler. He's an enabler, you know what, in a sport where everybody might be on something, if everybody is on something, the way that it looks, then it is an even playing field.
There is no unfair advantage.
Not if everybody's on something, and if you look at this long enough, that's how it starts to look. Like all of these guys are on something. Ultimately, I don't lose sleep over the anti-doping issue in the sport of boxing anymore. I don't get outraged. I don't get up in arms about it. It's an occupational hazard, from the looks of it, for all the participants, all the aforementioned parties. They know what they're getting themselves into, and they all know what's really going on. The most that I think will come of Caleb Plant's tirade is an even worse beating than the one that Canelo Alvarez was going to give him, because he's making the mistake of poking the bear. He's making the mistake of making things personal.
Oh, you want to piss this guy off?
The way Abel Sanchez did, with all those quips about carnitas, the way Billy Joe Saunders did very recently. Okay, good. Piss the guy off.